Thanks. I want to get now to a perennial, that's trade. It seems to be a perennial issue, but at the same time, some of the disputes get a lot of attention, but it's such a key source of strength economically and in terms of bilateral relations. Over the last few years, we have faced an unprecedented series of challenges, though. The Section 232, national security, tariffs with regard to steel and aluminum, and a challenging renegotiation that you know so well with regard to NAFTA. Protectionism, at least to some extent, now does seem to be a bipartisan matter in Washington, and there aren't very many bipartisan matters. What should we expect out of a Biden administration?
Yeah. So I agree that certain forms of protectionism remain something that is of great appeal regardless of political strife in certain quarters. I think that there are Democrats whose constituents are very attracted to certain forms of protectionism as Republicans. It's not a partisan issue. It's an issue that arises, in my view, this is a very personal view, but in my view, this issue arises when people are feeling less than secure about their financial and job situation. And they're feeling nervous and insecure, and communities or industries or sectors, and therefore they feel that what they need to do is turn inwards. And they turn inwards by erecting walls, right? Tariff walls. And I think that we are in a moment of economic insecurity right now, and that it's quite natural and historically, fairly predictable that those sentiments will rise in a moment like this. But the other thing that's very bipartisan, actually, and is an important factor to remember, is that the new NAFTA, the CUSMA as we call it in Canada, or the USMCA as they call it down here, was also very bipartisan. So by the time that agreement passed through Congress, it was one of the most bipartisan trade treaties in recent history, with virtually all Democrats in both the House and the Senate, not all of them, but virtually all of them voting in favor of the USMCA. So I think our task is, and my task, and it's the task of my team down here in Washington and across the US, is to hearken back to the reasons why both Democrats and Republicans supported that agreement. And the reasons that they supported it is because, one, they recognize the importance of trade with Canada and Mexico for their national economic resilience. Two, because the agreement was modernized in a way that can give our markets an advantage and a competitive edge over other regions. And that at a time when we are trying to get our economy back on track, but not only get it back on track, sort of propel it into the future, we need to take advantage of those rules that we put in place. And the third thing is that those rules were largely focused on trying to bring people into international trade that hadn't been there before. So for our country, for the United States and for Mexico, the vast majority of our economy is driven by small and medium-sized enterprises, not big, huge companies. But small and medium-sized enterprises trade at a fraction of the rate of larger companies. And yet, what we know is that little companies, small companies, medium companies, that actually engage in international trade, that sell their wares internationally, pay higher wages, are more resilient and more profitable. And so for the health of our own economy, and it's true here in the US and it's true in Mexico, we want to create businesses that trade. So you can't at the one side be promoting all the national benefits of trade for yourself without necessarily making sure that you make that trade available to your partners. So kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but the answer is, you can't, trade is good. The Democrats and the Republicans have recognized that trade is good if it's fair, if it's rules-based, and we need to build off of that with this new administration, and frankly with the Republicans that remain in the Senate and the House, to push back against protectionist instincts.
Let me stick with NAFTA 2.0, if I can call it that. And Robert Lighthizer, the outgoing U.S. trade representative, wrote in, I think it was Foreign Affairs not long ago, something that you alluded to, which is the negotiation, tough negotiation wasn't really aimed against Canada and Mexico, although I must admit sometimes it seemed to be in terms of some of the rhetoric at least, as to, deal with free riders, as he called it. Other countries that were getting into the North American trading space on the cheap, if you like. And that got him to thinking about reshoring and global supply chain, which you already mentioned. What should we be thinking about, sectors that we should be thinking about in terms of nearshoring, which is one of the terms, reshoring, and working more closely with our CUSMA partners?
Yeah. So, I think that we are going to spend quite a bit of time in the months and years to come reflecting on what this complete upheaval of our globe because of COVID has demonstrated and has shown us, and what that teaches us for the future. And one of the things that I think it absolutely has shown us is, and this is true for Canada, it's true for the US, and I know many of our European partners and others feel the same way. What it has shown us is that we may not be as resilient as we need to be in some of the crucial areas of our security. So when I say security, I mean health security, food security, energy security, national security, that we need to be ensuring that we are have a certain level of independence as nations. But we all have also recognized, because it's a global pandemic, and as we've all seen, it is not something that any one country can address alone. We've also recognized that no country can go it alone. So there needs to be sort of a baseline of resilience in the context of partnerships that you can really rely on, partnerships that you can count on when the chips are down, will be there for you. Just like, and I would say, just to point to it, and a very concrete example of this was when the US closed their border to the export of a number of PPEs, including N95 masks in the early days of the COVID crisis. They kept it open to us and Mexico, and continued to allow the export of those critical supplies that were in short supply here in the United States to us and to Mexico. And the reason that they did that was because our three countries are deeply integrated in the production of PPEs. And so you can't, again, it kind of gets back to my other answer, you can't be promoting international trade and supply chains when it is beneficial to you to manufacture your product and not let others take advantage of that symbiotic relationship. And so I think that what we're going to have to do is have a very good look at those supply chains to see where we were insufficiently resilient, to try to work with our partners to create a community of resilience. And we're already, even before the pandemic, we were already doing that in some areas. So we have started this is bilateral, it's not Canada, US, Mexico, but we've started with the United States a very robust program on looking at critical minerals. So critical minerals and rare earths are products that are used in, they're rare mining products, many of which are found in Canada, that are used in high tech and a lot of clean tech production. And while we have them in Canada, we don't exploit them, we don't exploit all of them. And much of the world production is centered in about 2 or 3 countries. And our country started realizing that is sort of a risky place to be, because what if those suppliers stop supplying or don't make the products available to us? Then we have a lot of manufacturing in clean tech and in high tech, in areas where we really want to be promoting excellence in our economies, that are going to have trouble getting the necessary supplies. So we have them, the US has some, and we are working on a plan to make sure that we are investing properly in that sector so that we will have a certain degree of independence and self-sufficiency. One example. There are many, but that is one example.
And it's a great example. I'm glad you mentioned rare earth because there's strategically, of course, in terms of global supplies, Asia is quite strong, and particularly China, which may come to be an issue with regard to the triangulation, if you like. I want to ask you though about one more potential challenge with the Biden administration. In this case, it's procurement and their Buy America program. We faced this challenge during the financial crisis in 2009 with a major stimulus program. That they originally, the early days of the Obama administration, and the vice president was obviously Mr. Biden, wanted to go completely into a Buy America program. In the end, we found a way to take part on, to some extent, a Buy North America plan, if you like, by opening up our own markets. Is that a means of going forward with this administration now? Because it is a major program that he's planning in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to start where we are today. And where we are today is only months after bringing into force an agreement that is designed to bring our economies together, to integrate our economies, to build on our ability to support each other mutually, to make each other more resilient. I think that's where we start. And in that context, then we talk about the benefits of ensuring that we both have access to each other's procurement markets, and looking at a Buy North America or Buy Canada US, depending on the procurement, the specifics of the procurement. It may be procurement opportunities that our Mexican friends aren't interested in. What I find is most important in dealing with sort of complicated and also sensitive trade issues is to be very fact-based, to not approach those issues from sort of generalities of procuring all product X internally is the way to go because it's going to create jobs in Canada or in the US or in Mexico or wherever, but to actually look at the proposal and the implications for the price that it would perhaps raise how it might raise the price in your particular infrastructure project, or to look at where those suppliers are in the globe, and if they are in your neighborhood and they are companies that exist actually on both sides of the Canada-US border, then why would you want to penalize those companies? And those are just a few examples, but digging down into what exactly the real world consequences of programs that are often conceived of in general terms tends to help us talk through these things more effectively with our American friends.
One of the ways, let me just stick with that for a second. One of the ways that we made progress a decade ago, if my memory's correct, was to work with the provinces and even with municipalities in some instances to open up their markets as well to procurement from American companies, so we would have the opportunity in the much bigger American market. And we made progress along those lines. I'm thinking that as we work through the negotiation on the US NAFTA, CUSMA, you really worked hard, and you were intimately involved in this on a Team Canada approach with provincial and territorial governments, municipal governments, and the private sector. Do those ties still bind, and is that one way into making progress this time around? Does it really come down to not just the federal government, but the other orders of government as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the secret sauce, I think, in our ability here in DC in particular, but across the country, to really get the word out is that we have terrific collaboration with the provinces, with municipal governments, with industry from across the country, with civil society groups that are relevant depending on the conversation. We are really, I found really, our partners are really, really excellent, our Canadian partners. So that is, it's huge, but it's also, they know their areas and they know their issues well. So if you want to take it back to government procurement, Ontario is the biggest procurement market for a number of US states. And so as I was saying, these conversations are most effective when they're very, very fact-based. So if there is an inclination in New York State or another state to maybe head in the direction of Buy American, then it can be very useful to say, well, that's interesting, but did you know that your companies have access to X number of millions and millions of dollars of procurement opportunities in Canada, in Ontario, in Quebec, in Alberta, Manitoba, whatever, every year. Getting right down into the facts and talking to those people who are most directly implicated by the consequences of the policy here in the United States at a local level can be very effective. And the best interlocutors can often be other local interlocutors who are doing business. So the company from Saskatchewan that's doing business in North Dakota or whatever, those people can be the most effective in getting the Canadian messages out.
I want to move to climate change. I think it's expected that on day one of the new administration in January 20th, I think, the president-elect and the president at that point will rejoin, his administration will rejoin the Paris Agreement on climate change, which will be music to ears around the world. How should we be thinking about clean tech, climate change measures? You mentioned this was one of the things the two leaders spoke about on their call a week ago, the president-elect and the prime minister, and particularly in the context that one of your key areas of focus is the Keystone Pipeline and how you balance that out. I know the foreign minister was talking about how important that is to maintain the approval of the Trump administration and continue to make progress, challenging in a circumstance where, as you said, the incoming administration has made climate change one of their 4 areas of priority. So take me through how you balance that, please.
Sure. I think it's a whole conversation, right? Just like Canada-US relations is a whole conversation that brings in many things often at the same time. There is no doubt that there is enormous scope for us to cooperate with an incoming Biden administration on climate change. They haven't fully developed all of their, the details of their plans, and what they will do will depend partly on what happens on the Hill, in particular in the Senate. And whether the Republicans maintain or don't maintain the control of the Senate, I think will be an interesting thing to watch, because it will have a bearing on whether the Biden administration will be able to pursue some of its objectives legislatively in one way or another way, or whether they'll be using a mixture of different measures. So we're going to have to see. But from the point of view of the stated objectives with respect to climate change, we couldn't be more aligned with. I mean, really, the alignment between our government's policies, our federal government's policies, and the Biden administration is enormous. And so there is a lot of scope for cooperation. There is a lot of scope for investment, for new technologies, for developing standards. I mean, there's a lot to do there. That's on the bilateral front. Globally as well, climate change is a global problem, and it has to be dealt with as a group of nations, and they will be welcomed back to the Paris discussions with open arms by all. There's no doubt about it. So we're really looking forward to that. And in fact, I think that the president-elect has said that one of the first things he wants to do internationally is talk about climate finance. So there's a lot of really interesting ideas there that we can look at. With respect to energy, our energy partnership, and where that fits into all of it. We have our position has always been to support the KXL project and the federal government's position, and we continue to support the project. We believe that we are the best partner for the United States in maintaining the necessary access to fossil fuel energy, even while it's on a path to a reduced carbon economy, and that's because of all of the partners that the U.S. can work with. towards meeting its energy needs, which include, for some time, are going to include some reliance on fossil fuels. We're one of the only ones with a price on carbon that have made a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050, where we have an industry that is deeply committed to reducing their carbon emissions, and the pipeline itself, the KXL pipeline project itself, has some really innovative, will have some really innovative components to reduce or even eliminate its own carbon footprint that they're going to be talking about. And in addition, it's a job creator at a time when this country is very, very focused on jobs. If you look at the vice president's platform or policy paper on climate, a lot of it is focusing around the jobs agenda as well. So I think we have a really good story to tell here when it comes to energy, and including fossil fuel energy and including the KXL pipeline, that it's not inconsistent with a partnership on climate change. In fact, having a partner that is so committed to fighting climate change is probably going to be an advantage. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to explain to the incoming administration, while also promoting all of our other forms of energy partnership, right? We have a terrific opportunity for hydro, solar, wind, nuclear, small modular reactors. I think are going to be an interesting area of focus for the incoming Biden administration, from what I understand. So there's a lot that we can do together in our energy independence partnership with the Americans.